There's an aspect of your long-term health that is rarely ever discussed, but on this week's episode of the Exercises Health Podcast, it's exactly what we want to highlight for you. We're going to cue our introduction and we're going to dive right into this conversation. Hey, welcome back, exercisers, to the Exercise is Health Podcast, brought to you by Muscle Activation Schaumburg and Exercise for Life Studios, where we believe that your health is your most valuable asset, and the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise is geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and today we are diving into your long-term health and an aspect of your long-term health that is rarely ever brought up. So when we think about keeping our bodies healthy for the long term, oftentimes the heart, the brain, like those are top of mind. Metabolic health, maybe, growing in popularity, more forefront of people's minds right now. Even like our joint health and making sure our joints stay healthy, and all that is fine and well. We definitely need our heart, our brain healthy. We definitely need, a healthy metabolism. We need our joints to stay functioning well. But there's something else that is rarely ever discussed, and even if it is brought up, the full story is not told. And that's what we want to talk with you about today.
That's right. The thing we're talking about today is your muscle health. Like Charlie said, there's so many aspects of long-term health that we often talk about. We talk about it at the doctor's office, we talk about it with our friends. So we're thinking heart health, brain health, metabolic health. That's things like, your blood sugar levels, trying to change our diet for that, joint health. But what we often miss, and one of the most important aspects of your body in terms of keeping it moving, keeping it feeling good, keeping it feeling free for the long term, is maintaining your muscle health. And this is really an odd one because almost like, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, almost like all the other aspects, like your brain and your heart, it works really well until it starts to not. And then your attention is brought to it. So like our brains work really well until we start feeling like, wow, my recall is like slowing down, or I'm not as sharp as I once was. And then you might start doing things to start helping your brain health. Or your heart, you never thought about your heart beating. It's automatically beating without you doing anything. And then you go to the doctor one day and they bring your attention to it. And then you're like, wow, I really need to focus on my heart health. Well, there are a lot of signs and symptoms that people have telling us, hey, you got to focus on your muscle health that we miss. And so it's just another one of those categories of long-term health where it feels great, it's fine, until eventually you haven't worked on it enough or you haven't maintained it enough that it starts becoming an issue.
Yeah, Julie, that's a really great point. There are so many signs and symptoms that our body gives us all along the way, from the time we are in our mid to late 20s and kind of every passing year after that, telling us, hey, your muscle health may not be, as robust as it used to be. Your muscles may not be in the place that they used to be. And for a while, we can, ignore it and not do anything about it and still operate, throughout our life. And for a while, I mean, like for decades, like most people can go through their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, and even partway into their 60s, completely doing all the things that they want to do. And then all of a sudden they hit 65, they hit 68, they hit 70, and they're like, wow, my body feels old all of a sudden. And it's like, for them, it feels like they just woke up one morning and they went from, spry and young to old. And it's like, what the heck happened over the last, 6.5 to 8 hours I just slept? I don't want to have a night like that again. That was horrible. Let's not do that again.
Yeah.
But the reality is it's something that has actually been building up for decades. So today what we want to highlight for you are some of the signs and symptoms that may be telling you your muscle health is on the decline, and what you can actually do about it to get your muscles working better, to improve the health and function of your muscles.
That's right. So I think the number one way that we know like your muscle health is going down and it needs a little bit more loving, needs a little bit more caring, is kind of like what Charlie just brought up in his casual story of like, hey, do you wake up and you feel like, I do not feel recovered. I feel like I have to recover from my sleep. I have to do all these things when I wake up just to feel ready to go. I have to do these stretches or this routine because that's a sign that your body isn't tolerating, your muscles aren't tolerating being in the positions of sleep. And that leads us to, I guess, the umbrella idea of there are more and more positions that you can't handle comfortably. So this would look like, I can't ride in the car for more than 30 minutes without my hip flaring up. I can't, get in the position to, pack my trunk in the morning for work. Or, I can't do other positions, like if I sleep funny. You look at kids, they sleep funny all the time. They sleep in all these different positions and they're fine because their muscle system recovers so quickly. And your muscle system can recover faster than it is now, but what happens is that over time is that when we're not caring for our muscles, when we're not doing the proper things to keep them strong and functioning properly, we start to lose our ability to handle positions.
Exactly. And so, as a general rule, if you're hearing what Julie's saying, you're like, okay, well, I don't know that I identified those like specific things, but as a general rule, how do I know? It's like if you go through an activity through your day, or you do something through your day, and you're like, wow, this many years ago, it felt easier to do it then than it does now. That's a sign that your muscle health is on the decline. So, whether it's like you're saying, Julie, whether it's, picking up your kids or grandkids, whether it's, packing stuff into the trunk of your car, or you're waking up in the morning and like, why am I feeling achier? Like it never used to feel this way 5, 10, 20, 30 years ago. Like I never used to wake up, in middle school or high school and be like, oh wow, like feeling so sore and achy from my last night of sleep. But now all of a sudden I'm feeling that way. That is a sign that your muscle health is on the decline. If you have these chronically tight muscles that don't seem to go away and your reasoning is, well, this is what happens when you're getting older. This is what happens when your body starts to age. This is what happens to everybody. It's just the natural decline. It's like, well, it's a very common decline, but it doesn't mean that there's something that you can't do about it. Like it doesn't mean that you are just subject to this and there's nothing that you can do. One, lay out what you can do, but you first need to understand to be able to identify like, oh yeah, these things are going on within my body. So if we're talking about muscle health and you can identify like, oh yeah, okay, maybe my muscle health is on the decline. What in the world actually is muscle health? Well, muscle health, there's two parts to it, is how well your muscles can contract and then how much output they have when they contract. So we might say, okay, well, that's strength, and strength is certainly part of it. Strength is actually kind of like step 2. Step 1 is the communication. Is like how efficiently do they contract? How well does your nervous system send signals to your muscles to get them to contract? How efficiently does that happen? How much compensation is happening? And can they even contract to begin with? So many people that we work with at the start, they have just a number of muscles that they're just not able to connect with, that are not able to contract well. And so they're completely missing this first piece of the puzzle. And because of that, they try to make up for that by building more and more and more output. But the problem is, if you're just focused on the output part and you're not taking care of the communication and that kind of initial contraction part, you're setting yourself for actually more long-term issues because of the number of compensations that you're furthering within your system.
That's right, Charlie. I want to just throw a story in here that really draws this picture really clearly. So last week I was working on a client. She exercises regularly. I mean, 3 times a week. She's with her trainer. She's worked out for 30 years. So she's having this hip pain, right? And when she has hip pain, she's always like, I know I need to work on my strength, but it's like also, hey, like you've been working on your strength for 30 years. And yeah, there are things she can still work on, right? Everyone's body needs to always be strengthening, because as you age, your strength goes down. So you have to keep counteracting that with building more and more strength. So we've got on the table, we worked on her with MAT, which is working on the communication, which is what Charlie had just brought up, the communication of your brain, nervous system, and your muscles. And her hip starts feeling so much better. She's like, wait, what is happening here? So I explained it to her like this. You know how every couple of years, Apple and Android comes out with like the newest, coolest phones? Mm-hmm. And like, we're all like, okay, either like we jump on it, we're like, yeah, we got to get it, the cool phone. Or eventually we're forced into it because my old phone stops working, whatever. There's like these new cool phones. You can keep getting newest and coolest phones. And when you call your family or whoever you call on the phone, your reception is what it is. Let's say it's really bad. And you're like, wow, if I just had the newest, coolest phone, and we all know, like if I go and buy the, iPhone 25, the reception, whatever you have, is still going to be the same. You just got a newer, cooler phone. But what changes the communication is actually if you changed your location, but really your provider, right? Like if you had like the 3-star provider and now you upgraded to the 5-star provider. That is the communication. So when you think about muscle activation techniques, we're saying, hey, let's get you the 5-star provider. Let's make sure everything is connected and you can talk to the people that you want to talk to. And then when you're thinking strengthening, we're thinking, now let's upgrade your phone. Let's go from the flip phone to the iPhone. Now let's go from the iPhone 1 to the iPhone 2. Now to the iPhone 3. Or if you're an Android, I don't know what the numbers are because I'm not an Android person, but you know what I'm saying. So when you work on strengthening your muscles, you work on changing your phone. You have a bigger, cooler phone, does more stuff, can handle more stuff. You can throw it on the ground now, it got more cool stuff, right? But if the communication's bad, it's still not going to work at its fullest capacity. And it's still great. You have a great new big phone. That's valuable. But with MAT, we try to make sure, hey, we have good communication no matter what phone you have. Of course, if you have a bigger, better one, that's probably going to be a little bit bigger and better. But we got to have the communication to start with.
Exactly. I love that analogy. And so if you are feeling any of the things that we've been talking about so far, is like, okay, like I wake up and I feel like I've aged 5 years. I feel like I have these tight muscles that never used to be there. Things that used to feel easy are now feeling way more difficult. Okay, yeah, I'm raising my hand saying my muscle health seems like it may be on the decline. And you're telling me step one is to figure out like whether or not I'm having these communication issues within my muscles. How do I go about doing that? Well, Julie, exactly as you said, that is what we do with muscle activation techniques. That is the purpose of MAT, to figure out where within your system you're having these communication issues between your brain and your spinal cord and your muscles. And because of that, there is a disruption in the ability for your muscles to contract. And so MAT, we're able to assess your body, identify where you're having those disruptions, and then address those directly and help to shore up those areas of your body where they have those weaker links, where there is that poor communication, and make sure that, you know, everything is crystal clear from a communication standpoint. But that is just step one. Remember, this is a two-step process, and the MAT in and of itself is extremely powerful. And making sure that your muscles can contract is extremely powerful and can resolve so much of what many people are experiencing from a kind of a negative decline in their muscle health. But a lot of times we also need to make sure that the output gets increased as well, especially if you're not currently strength training at least 3 days a week. Okay, if you're not currently doing your strength training at least 3 days a week, then we need to make sure that we are increasing that output as well. And that comes from doing more strength training or doing strength training to begin with. That is step two, once we make sure that your muscles can contract.
That's right. Honestly, most people can use a little bit of work in both. But what's more common is that people are already working on their strength training, or they know about strength training, right? It's like if you work out, you're like, yeah, I exercise, I strength train. And if you don't, you probably are like, yeah, I probably should work out and strength train. A lot of people don't know about step one, but both are incredibly important. It's important for you to teach your body regularly, hey, we need to handle force. We need to handle force, meaning like picking up stuff, being able to do stairs, being able to manage your own body weight. That's handling force. We need to be able to handle positions, right? We need to teach our body, hey, we can be strong when we're bent over, and when we're twisted around, and when our knees are bent, and when our knees are straight, and when our arm is up over our head. We're teaching your body how to do that when you regularly strength train. We also need to teach your body to have some type of endurance, right? Have you ever been for a walk or a run or upstairs and you're like, wow, I didn't realize I couldn't do 2 flights of stairs. This is making me super winded. That's a sign of lack of endurance in your muscles. So it's really important that we're building this engine of your muscles, this muscle size, the contractility, the stability of your muscles. And this is what really leads to what I think most people think of as active aging and what we view our future to be like. No one really wants to feel like, yeah, when I hit 80, I hope I can only sit in a chair.
Right.
You know, we think, oh, I want to be able to walk. I want to be able to, you know, go play pickleball or be able to walk on the beach to watch the sunset, be able to handle that. I want to be able to get up and out of chairs without someone helping me. That kind of activity is what keeping your muscles strong and healthy leads to. And really, I think it's the combination. It ends up being the combination of both, is regularly checking in, are muscles communicating, and regularly checking in, can muscles handle the activity?
Exactly, because here's what's not said. You might be hearing this right now and you're thinking, okay, well, I already do my strength training. So, this just sounds like, I need to add in MAT. And the MAT is clearly going to be important to make sure your muscles can contract. But here's what you're not being told about the strength training that you may be doing is oftentimes what we see is just doing the strength training actually disrupts the contraction communication process. Okay, it goes and actually makes that communication process worse when your system is already vulnerable. And that's why skipping to step 2 is such a big issue. Because you are skipping step 1, you're going right to step 2, and you're not ensuring that your muscles can contract well to begin with. You're not ensuring that that communication is smooth and efficient between your brain and your spinal cord and your muscles. And oftentimes what we see when that's the case, when you go and you try to do strength training, that's when you're feeling like, yeah, every time I go and try to lift weights, I hurt myself. Every time I go and try to lift weights, like I'm sore for days on end. Every time I try to go and lift weights, like I don't really feel the muscles I'm trying to work. It just feels really achy. Like nothing feels good about this. And so if that's ever been your experience, trying to do your strength training, or you're like, what, I am doing my strength training, and yeah, I'm just kind of, gutting it out because that's what I expect it to be at, 65, 75 years old. Like it's just not going to feel good, but it's what I need to do. That's the indication that you are skipping step 1. And step 1 is we need to improve that communication. And what's happening is when you are skipping step 1 and going right to step 2, is you are actually furthering the disruption of that communication. And that's why we're saying you're creating more compensations and you are creating more issues long term by skipping step 1. So yes, you need to make sure you're doing your strength training 100%, absolutely. But if the communication is not there, that's when we start to see that as the years go by, more and more people are getting injured with their strength training. More and more people are feeling constantly achy, beat up, sore. They're having these chronic pain, this chronic tightness that develops every single time they try to do their strength training or try to exercise. That's a sign that you're skipping step 1.
That's right. Like if we can convince you or you can convince yourself that you should be strength training, which everyone should be, and the reason that you aren't is because you're having some types of aches and pains, which is really common, is probably the reason being is probably because you're missing out on that step 1, working on making sure things are contracting properly. When things are contracting properly, your joints feel supported. They don't feel achy, pinchy, funky when you exercise. Your muscles also don't hold tightness, right? You don't feel that like, wow, I feel so tight after I exercise, or this creates a lot of tightness after I exercise. So keeping up with step 1, with making sure you're getting some type of regular muscle activation techniques is critical to keeping your active life up, keeping the muscle health up. And really, if we even zoom out the next step, regularly strength training, keeping your muscle health up is what's going to actually keep your heart really healthy and keep your brain really healthy and keep your joints really healthy. So as much as we think of it, and keep your blood sugar in check, keep all your metabolic health level. So really making sure that you can exercise as comfortably and regularly as possible is really key. So we can think about MAT and making sure muscles are connecting is a thing that keeps me exercising regularly. Exercising regularly is my best form of prescription to make sure my heart, brain, metabolic health, all your arteries, you're able to handle, your life better. But also one thing that we see very directly is that it helps you just to be able to continue to live the life you want to live. I think the least of our interests often is like, let me manage my heart numbers and my blood values. We want to think more about, hey, am I able to make it to my kid's soccer game and sit on the bleachers? Am I able to make it to that flight and feel okay when we're going on our trip of a lifetime? Those types of things are what we want you focusing on, and your insurance policy almost is making sure that you're regularly getting your muscle activation techniques so that you feel good, and then also making sure that you exercise regularly so that also feels good.
Exactly. So if you're in the Chicagoland area or willing to travel to the Chicagoland area and would like to experience muscle activation techniques for yourself, that is our specialty here at Muscle Activation Schaumburg. All you have to do to see our availability and get on our schedule is go to www.matschaumburg.com. There's a big green button that says Get Started. You can click that and you can schedule yourself for your initial MAT consultation and assessment. And if you're looking for guidance on your strength training, that's exactly what we help you to do within the Exercise for Life membership. We teach you how to exercise in a way that builds up your body, that doesn't leave you feeling achy and sore. And we tell you exactly what workouts you need to be doing all throughout the weeks to make sure that you are getting your strength training in consistently and doing so in a way that leaves you feeling healthier, leaves you feeling stronger, and allows you to keep doing all the things in life that you want to do for as long as you want to do them. So to get into the Exercise for Life membership, you can try it out for free for 30 days by going to www.exerciseforlifestudios.com. So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that is feeling like they are focused on making sure their brain stays healthy and their heart stays healthy and their metabolism stays healthy and all of those things, for their long-term health, but they may be completely missing out on their muscle health? Share this episode with them so they can understand the importance of making sure their muscles stay healthy long-term and how to go about doing that. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to us and leave us a rating and review. Not only does it help people find our podcast when they're looking for information on exercise, it also helps them find our podcast when they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us that 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week. We'll talk with you all next week.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.